Welcome everyone to RETOLD, African American Art and Folklore. My name is Dr. Tameka Ellington. I'm the guest curator here at the Akron Art Museum. And this show is inspired by years of work that I've been doing using African American art, culture, and folklore and tradition as an inspiration for design, as an inspiration for retelling the stories of my culture. In this particular show, you're going to see 75 works that were produced by about 45 African-American artists that come from all over the United States, all over the world. The collection that was utilized for this particular show comes from the West and Missy Cochran collection. They are collectors. They have over 500 works of African-American art. They're located in LaGrange, Georgia, and I had the honor of going down to LaGrange to meet with them, to go through their collection, to select all the works for this show. So I'm really excited that you all are here with me, and I hope you enjoy. RETOLD African-American Art and Folklore has been divided up into 4 different sections: remembering, resistance, religion, and racialization. And so I'll walk you all through all parts of the show and talk about what those themes of the show, what they mean, how the artworks relate to those, and we'll have a full picture of the concept behind RETOLD. My goal with this show was to be able to tell as much of the story as I could of the African-American experience. Of course, not all could be told, but the most that I could tell, I wanted to be able to give a full picture of many of the challenges, many of the triumphs that African-American people have faced over the years. And I'm hoping to do that first, starting with remembering. This part of the exhibition is called Remembering. And the wonderful thing about the show that I want to point out is that when you come to the show, you can have access to a program. And inside the program will list the folk tales or folk stories and poetry that inspired the show. The particular folk tale that inspired this section of the show is called The People Can Fly by Virginia Hamilton. If you scan the QR code, you'll get a chance to listen to the story being told by a good friend of mine. His name is Dr. Babacar Mambai. He is an expert on African culture and literature, and he is actually the one who got me inspired and started my love of wanting to learn more about folklore and folk tales of African-American culture and African culture. And this particular part of the exhibition is all about my desire to want to remember how the African-American experience started. Of course, we all know that the African-American experience started with slavery. I want to pay homage to my ancestors. And so that's why this part of the exhibition was so important for me. This is how we start. This is whenever I do a tour of the show, I want to start right here because I want everybody to understand that the African-American experience is something to be remembered and something to be honored. The first piece that I'll discuss in the section of remembering is an artwork by Albert Wagner. This piece here, the reason why I chose this piece is because it reminds me of the start of the African-American experience. Our ancestors coming over from various parts of West Africa, being placed on ships and then being brought over across the Atlantic Ocean to various parts of the Americas, the Caribbean, and that's how it all started. As I mentioned before, it's really important that with this show, I begin the process by really having an opportunity to remember how the African-American experience began. This particular piece here by David Flood evoked an emotion in me when I saw it. One of the things that you'll recognize as I take you through the show is that all of the pieces in some way, shape, or form tell a story. They tell stories that I've experienced myself as an African-American woman, or stories that I've heard others have experienced in the African-American culture. The artwork by David Flood, the reason why it was chosen for the show is because it evoked an emotion that was brought up in me about an experience that I had when I went to Ghana. Ghana, West Africa, is one of the places that African American people were taken from. And when I got a chance to visit Ghana, as you can see in the piece by David Flood, it looks like a beautiful white building right next to the ocean. And when I got a chance to go to Ghana, I visited the Elmina Castle as well as the Cape Coast Castle. These are two structures that were built for the purpose of harboring enslaved individuals and then being able to keep them held hostage until the boats came to be able to take them away. And so one of the things that was really interesting about these structures was that they were big, beautiful white buildings. They were typically 3 or 4 levels high. And on the top level is usually where they had church. They were Christians. The people that came first to Ghana to take away the slaves were first the Portuguese came, and then the Dutch came, and then eventually the country Ghana was then inhabited by the British, who eventually ended up colonizing Ghana. But when those Europeans came over, they built these structures. The top floor typically was where they went to church. The second or third floor was typically where they would go and they would live. That would be their living quarters. And then on the very bottom level is where they would have dungeons, where they kept our enslaved ancestors until the boats were ready to come to pick them up. And so when I saw this piece by David Flood, it definitely brought back memories of my time in Ghana, visiting the Elmina and Cape Coast castles. When you go to those places, you can still feel the energy, you can still smell our people. And so it was really important that I want to represent that emotion, that evoked emotion, that I want to tell that story of how the African American experience began. This piece by Melvin Edwards definitely evoked some emotion with me when I thought about and wanted to remember the African American experience. As we all know, the African American experience began with slavery, which involved chains, our people being locked in chains. Melvin Edwards is an artist that always uses chains in his artwork, whether it's 2-dimensional works or whether it's a 3-dimensional piece. He's a sculptor as well. He does these big, beautiful sculptures. And all of the work that he does will include some form of a chain. And the reason why Melvin Edwards does this is because he wants to retell the story about how it's important for us to understand that Black people were brought over here to the United States and other areas of the world in chains, but chains were never meant to hold people. Chains were meant to be a functional item that we use in our everyday lives, not to hold people hostage. This piece by Valerie Maynard definitely evoked emotion and allows us to have a glimpse into the lives of our ancestors and what they could have possibly been feeling at the time when they were taken. The look on the face of this beautiful piece, this is a print by Valerie Maynard, and when I saw this piece, it gave me the sense of the terror. The piece is called Terror Passing, but it gives me the sense of the terror that our people could have been facing when they were taken away from their homeland, when they were forced to go into these dungeons, and then they were forced to go from the dungeon through the door of no return on the ships to be taken to a land that they had no idea where they were going to be going. This beautiful work by Jack White was chosen for the remembering part of the exhibition because, again, it evokes this emotion that reminds me of the story told by Virginia Hamilton, The People Can Fly. When you see this particular piece, it looks like there's a human body that has been in the process of an evolution. The story of The People Can Fly is all about African American people being forced to work on plantations in the South, picking cotton. And these individuals were being treated so terribly that they began to have this, really what it was they were having instances of PTSD, and they were remembering that they had the ability to be able to fly. There's lots of different folk tales that are out there about Africans being able to fly back home to Africa. And this piece by Jack White really helps to get us the opportunity to remember how our ancestors, again, may have felt in the process of fantasizing, really. A lot of what African Americans did while they were working on plantations is fantasizing and remembering what their experience was like before they came to the United States or before they came to the Caribbean or wherever they were located, being forced to work for free. And so this particular piece helps us to understand the imagination that many African American people and many other Africans that are across the diaspora, what they would have been going through in this process of remembering and imagining that they can fly back home to Africa. Curly Raven Holton is a very important artist in this show. I wanted to definitely show some work from him. He is a Kent State University alum. I was previously a professor of fashion, a fashion scholar at Kent State University for many years. And Curly Raven Holton holds a dear place in my heart. So I definitely wanted to have some of his work in the show. And this particular piece by Curly Raven Holton is called Bred for Pleasure. The reason why I chose this piece for the section of the show called Remembering is because it helps us tell the story about how our Black women, when they were brought over to various parts of the world, to the United States, to the Caribbean and others, that some of them were actually brought over specifically just to breed. And in the process of being brought over just to breed, they had to deal with so many different things. Many of them became wet nurses, where they had to not only nurse their own children that they birthed, but then also nurse the children of the masters as well. A lot of those women who were bred for pleasure were also, sex was forced on them by their masters. And a lot of times out of that sex came the birth of children that were from the master and from the enslaved individual. And so this whole idea of being bred for pleasure also too plays on the stereotype about African American women that was developed during the late 1800s. This idea of Jezebel. The trope Jezebel was created during the minstrel series that started in the late 1800s. The minstrel shows were shows that were created by white people where they mocked Black culture in various ways. And in doing so, they created all of these different characters, and Jezebel was one of those characters. Jezebel was created to give rationale to the reason why it was okay for white enslavers to rape, to fornicate with their enslaved women. And so supposedly someone who was a Jezebel was oftentimes asking to be raped. She was asking for this relationship with her master because of the fact that Jezebel was an insatiable lustful person who always needed sex. Basically, what it was doing was it was dehumanizing the African women and just trying to give rationale to why it was okay for the enslavers to treat them in the way that they did. This beautiful piece of artwork by Tina Dunkley is called Blessed is the Fruit of Thy Womb. And this particular piece evokes so many different emotions that comes up. This is the last piece that I'll speak about in the section Remembering. As you can see, this piece it's telling many different stories. It's telling the story of African American being captured. It's telling the story of African American people being placed on the ships. It's also telling the story of the stereotypical dehumanizing language that was surrounding African American culture. This type of language, again, was brought up by white people mocking Black people. During the minstrel series, there was a trope that was called the coon trope that was created. This particular coon trope, you can actually see on this label here. It's talking about the fact that African American people supposedly were very lazy individuals. They were people who were uneducated, people who were buffoons, and only thing they wanted to do was to sit around and eat watermelon. Again, this trope was a way for white people to dehumanize the African American people, to be able to show that they were less than everyone else, less than human. And Tina Dunkley's piece is a beautiful representation of all of the things that African American people have gone through, the aspect of being captured, the aspect of being placed on these ships, and then in the process being dehumanized in the process. And one of the things that's beautiful about the piece, if you are able to come to an exhibition where this is going to be on display again, you'll be able to see that each of these little seeds was actually created with a glitter powder, almost as if to say Tina Dunkley wanted to say that in each individual that was placed on the ship was a gem, was someone special, was someone's family member, was someone that was cared about. And in the process of being captured, in the process of being placed on the ship, these people still mattered. This part of the exhibition is called Resistance. And I developed this particular part of the show because I wanted to talk about the African American experience, the parts of it where African American people resisted against discrimination, resisted against cultural barriers, and in ways that they did that not only included fighting for rights or what we think of as activism and those kinds of things, but by just being a Black person and living in joy, African American people resisted against society. In the program, you'll see a part of the program that says resistance. You'll get a chance to see a poem by an amazing poet called Pages Matam. And you can also scan the QR code and listen to my friend, Dr. Babacar Mumbai, narrate the poem by Pages Matam, which is entitled Black Joy Uninterrupted. It starts, "Come celebrate with me, that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." And so in this particular part of the exhibition, we're going to talk about different ways that African American people have resisted against society's ways of being able to keep them down, ways of discrimination, and ways that Black people, again, have been dehumanized over time. All right, in the exhibition section called Resistance, you're going to find beautiful pieces of artwork that are a representation of this essence of Black joy. Black joy is a concept that was created during the time of our social unrest that we had with George Floyd. Basically, the concept of Black joy is a way for us to look at resistance in a different way. Typically, when we think about resistance, we think about the physical act of fighting to resist. We think about going and picketing and striking and being activists. But there are other ways that Black people have resisted against cultural barriers, cultural discrimination. And one of the ways is through family. As we all know that when African American people were brought over to be enslaved, many times family was a critical aspect of their lives that they couldn't benefit from. Families would be torn apart, mothers away from daughters and sons, husbands away from their wives. And so the utter existence of being able to have the agency to have a family is a way that Black people resist. And so this particular piece by Romare Bearden is called The Family. As you can see, there's a mother, father, children in this piece, and just the total existence that Black people now have the agency of being able to be connected with their families, not fearing ever being torn apart is a way for us to resist. And then this piece right here by David Driscoll, this is a beautiful piece with lots of different colors, big, bold colors. And in this piece, this is called The Farmer and His Wife. Again, African-American people, when they were enslaved, they weren't allowed to marry like others. And if they did get married, it had to be to the benefit of whoever was their owner or enslaver. And the fact that a farmer can select a wife, the fact that a farmer can now have the agency to start a family with a wife is a form of resistance. This beautiful piece by Radcliffe Bailey is called UNIA. which stands for the Universal Negro Improvement Association, that was created by Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey. The UNIA was actually created to denounce all the work that the NAACP was working towards. Marcus Garvey was someone who believed that the NAACP wasn't really doing what they needed to do for Black people. And so he stepped in with the UNIA to do the work, to really bring forth what I loved about Marcus Garvey the most was his authenticity and the fact that he was always very truthful in what needed to happen for Black people. And so this particular piece is beautiful in that it has some textural elements to it, and then also too in the middle of a photograph of a meeting that was being held for the UNIA. This beautiful piece by Valerie Maynard called Unfinished Business definitely helps us to retell the story of several Black people that have been killed as a result of police brutality. When we think about this piece called Unfinished Business, what comes to mind is the issues of George Floyd, the issues of here in Akron, Ohio, we had Jalen Walker, who was unarmed man, who was a Black unarmed man who was chased down and then murdered by the police, Akron police here. And so this piece was something that was definitely important for me to have in the show. As a form of resistance, Black people, Black men, Black women that have had to deal with the police oftentimes were, in a sense, ill-equipped to do so. Even though they did not resist the police, they still faced the consequences of just being a Black person in the United States. This work by Emma Amos is called Joe. It was inspired by the famous boxer Joe Louis. Joe Louis played a major part in African-American history during the Great Depression, when so many African-American people, everybody really was disenfranchised. But of course, whenever something happens to our society, African-American people suffer more than others due to discrimination and other things. But Joe Louis gave African-American people the desire to continue to want to fight, to continue to want to resist against cultural barriers. And Emma Amos, paying tribute to this boxer, this well-renowned individual who had such a great impact on African-American culture, she did so in this beautiful lithograph. If you could see this up close, there's so much movement in it. There's little bits of color as in a way to be able to represent what Joe Louis meant to the African-American people. He was, in a sense, a form of resistance. Just him being able to be in front of the camera, to be able to be someone who basically represented African-American people at that particular time was a form of resistance. In the part of the exhibition called Resistance, we're going to see a beautiful collection by a prolific printmaker named Jacob Lawrence. He did an entire collection that was inspired by the war in Haiti, the Revolutionary War in Haiti. The Revolutionary War in Haiti was led by Toussaint Louverture. You can see him right here in this piece of artwork. He was in the process of strategizing how he can help his people become independent. By this particular time, the French had taken over. They brought Nigerian people over from West Africa over to Haiti, enslaved those individuals in the country of Haiti. And now they're trying to figure out how they can get their freedom, how they can get their independence. And so Toussaint Louverture, who was the head general for the Haitian Revolution, he began to strategize to see how he could come up with an idea of how to develop, concoct a way for them to become free. And in doing so, he started to call on his ancestors. He called on his religion. The Nigerians that came over to Haiti, they were practitioners of voodooism. And so he brought that with him. And so in this particular piece, you can see now that Toussaint Louverture has concocted the strategy. He's come up with the idea. He's come up with some of the plans. He began to then tell those plans to some of his greatest confidants. They together began to flesh the plan out a little bit more about ways that they can go about winning the Haitian Revolution. And so once the plan was all put in place, it was created, they went out into the town. They started talking to the people who were in the town about what was going to happen, talking to them about the fact that a war was going to be coming, that they were going to get their independence. And so then they go into battle with the French. While they're in war, they fight. They use what they know of as their religious faith, which is voodooism. They use that as strength. They use that as guidance. They called on their ancestors. They called and spoke with the dead to get inspiration, to get ideas on how to culminate this strategy to be able to win the war. Once they go into battle, the battle was a rough battle, it was a difficult battle, but they eventually ended up winning this battle. And like I said, in doing so, they called on their religious faith. One of the things that was important to remember here in this part of the exhibition called resistance, when voodoo faith was used as a form of resistance against the French, once the French lost the Haitian Revolution, and remember now, the Haitian Revolution was the only successful revolt where people not only gained their freedom, but they also gained land in the process. And so once the French were pushed out of Haiti, they went around the world and told everybody about how difficult it was over there in Haiti with the people because of the fact that they were voodooists, they were practicing voodooism. And so the idea of voodooism becoming something that was considered evil, considered something that was very, was demonic, those things became very important because of the fact that the Haitian individuals, they were Nigerian at the time, Haitian people that were living in Haiti, those enslaved individuals, they used their voodoo culture. And because they used voodooism, their voodoo culture, their voodoo faith to get their freedom, the French people demonized it as being an evil religion. And so the fact that we know voodooism today as something that is considered evil, it all stems from this history of the Haitian Revolution. This entire wall that you'll see in the area of the exhibition called Resistance is a beautiful representation of African American people, not only resisting by a form of fighting, but resisting as a form of being creatives and living in joy. As I mentioned before, the concept of Black joy is something that is very important to African American culture. It's a form of resistance that allows us to just be who we are authentically. When African American people were brought over as enslaved individuals, if they picked up an instrument, if they learned a performance, if they were dancers of any sort, oftentimes it was to the pleasure of the people that were their enslavers. And so the fact that now people have the agency, Black people now have the agency to be able to choose what they want to do in the creative fields, whether they want to be an artist, maybe they want to be a performer. They have the resistance available, the agency available to be able to choose if they want to do those things. It's no longer forced upon them to become performers, to be musicians. They can choose those as a way of life. All right, so now we are in the part of the exhibition called Religion. This is one of my favorite parts of the show, where I get a chance to talk about various kinds of religious beliefs, religious practices that African American people have. The reason why this was important to the show is because I wanted to debunk some of the myths about Black culture and about Black religion. When you come to the show and you have this brochure, you'll get a chance to see on the inside that I used a folk tale called A Flying Fool. It came from the African American folktale stories of Black traditions and the New World, which was a selected work by Roger Abrams, who is a well-renowned author. And when you scan the QR code, you'll get a chance to listen to the folk tale called A Flying Fool. And so this particular part of the exhibition, you'll see works that represent voodoo culture. You'll see works that represent just overall universal spirituality, as well as Christian beliefs. This artwork by John Wilson is a representation of voodoo culture. One of the reasons why I chose this piece is because I really want to help debunk the myths that we know of as voodoo culture. Typically, when we think about voodoo culture, we think about evil, when in all actuality, voodoo culture is like any other religion. We speak to ancestors, we speak to the dead, we pray to the saints when we think about Catholic religion. So it's very similar to that. This particular piece is just showing someone who was speaking to someone who was no longer with us, which is the same thing that other people do in other religions. So it was important for me to help retell the story about voodoo culture and how it has evolved over time, and how no, voodoo culture is not evil. It's like any other religion. This beautiful work by Amina Johnson called The Chicken Foot Woman is also another example of voodoo culture. Again, it was really important for me to debunk the myths about voodoo culture. When we think about good luck charms, typically we think about horseshoes, we think about four-leaf clovers, we even think about the evil eye that is very popular in Indian and other hoodoo and other Hinduism and Buddhist cultures. But in voodoo culture, they use the chicken foot. The chicken foot is a way to ward off evil. Again, voodoo culture is very similar to lots of different types of cultures, lots of different types of religion. And they also, pray and they want to ward off evil. And the way that they do that is by holding chicken feet in their pocketbook. Maybe somebody might keep it on as a necklace or keep it in their purse or their pocket. And it's really important that we understand that, again, voodoo culture is not evil. It's like any other religion, like any other culture. This amazing piece by Willie Cole is a beautiful, beautiful work that is played off of or inspired by the traditional piece that you see here, which was created by Grant Wood, the American Gothic. This is a piece of artwork that is probably one of the most famous pieces of artwork, but Willie Cole redid the piece. And in doing so, what he wanted to do was to bring Black people, Black culture back into American culture. And so Willie Cole oftentimes is inspired by domestic workers. He's inspired by women who have labored for pennies on the dollar to take care of others, to take care of white culture. This was a job, a domestic worker. That was a particular job that Black women were able to have after the abolishment of slavery. It was one of the jobs that was available to Black women. And so Willie Cole, in many ways, wants to pay homage to domestic workers. His mother, his aunt, and his grandmother, they were all domestic workers. And oftentimes you'll see in Willie Cole's work, you'll see that he'll use the symbol of an iron. You'll see that he'll also use the symbol of ironing boards. He did a whole collection one time where he used solely ironing boards, and he printed on those ironing boards as a representation of a symbol of his grandmother, as a representation and symbol of his aunts and his mother. And so Willie Cole not only wants to pay homage to domestic workers, but like I said, he also wants to bring in African culture to this. And so by using these two masks, these are Yoruba masks from Nigeria. They were inspired by the masks that you'll typically see that are used to worship the Ogun god, which is one of the Orisha gods. Orisha is one of the religions in Nigerian culture where they pray to the Orishas, which are gods, different gods. And so the god Ogun is the god of iron, which again, Willie Cole plays on the whole concept of iron. So these two masks represent Ogun, the god of iron. And this particular piece of artwork really is synonymous with all aspects of this particular exhibition. So this piece could have been placed in remembering, it could have been placed in resistance. It was, again, here placed in religion, but it also could have been placed in racialization because, again, Black people were taken out of American culture. What we think of as American culture, Black people were taken out of it. And Willie Cole in this particular piece of artwork, put Black people, put Black culture back into American culture. Okay, another amazing piece by Willie Cole is called The Ogun Sisters. Willie Cole, again, is inspired by domestic workers. He often uses irons and ironing boards in his works. And you can see in these two pieces right here that he used two women who have on the mask of Ogun, which is one of the Orisha gods. Above their head, you can see a voodoo symbol. And voodooism actually originated in Nigeria. So it all ties together. This Orisha religion is the start of the voodoo religion that we know of today. And he wanted to really preface this whole idea of iron. So again, the voodoo tradition came from the Orishas. The Orisha god of iron is Ogun. And so he created this piece that says 26 protons and 30 neutrons, which is actually the element that we need to create iron. The next piece that we're going to see is a piece by Margot Humphrey. Margot Humphrey's piece is called Sunday Afternoon. This particular piece of artwork is very important to the collection because once African American people were brought over as enslaved individuals, they were not allowed to have religion. They were not allowed to go to church in the beginning. They were just brought here to work, and that's all they were brought here to do. After laws were passed in the early 1700s, there was a law that was passed that restricted enslavers from going over to various parts of Africa to bring Africans back over to the New World, what they called. And so because they were no longer able to bring people from Africa, they realized that they had to take better care of their investment. And in doing so, taking better care of their investment meant that they had to allow the people a day off so that they can have a day to rest. And Sunday became that day to rest. Sunday became not only the day to rest, but it also became the day to go to church. It also became the day to groom and do your hair. That was the only time that Black people were able to have an opportunity to just be with family. And so Sunday afternoon, Sunday's best has a lot to do with African American culture and the evolution that we know of as enslavement and the evolution that we know of as Black culture and Christianity. Christianity was a religion that was brought over from Africa to the United States and various areas of the world. And it was mostly taught to us from the Europeans. So it was the Christian faith that we know of was taught to us from the Europeans. And it was something that we were brought up with. And so when we think about culture, when we think about religion, we oftentimes think about Black people putting on their Sunday best, going to church, and being able to spend time with family. So that's what this piece is a representation of. It's a beautiful, beautiful work of artwork, print piece by Margot Humphrey. The part of the exhibition called Racialization was created so I could tell the story about how African American people have been racialized throughout history. There's many different ways that we've been racialized via religion, via economics, via redlining and where we were told that we could live. African American people have had to deal with so many different types and forms of discrimination. And so it was really important for me to add this particular part to the exhibition to help, again, retell these stories so that people can have a better understanding of the total aspects of African American culture that has been racialized. In the area of racialization, these two pieces are very important to this piece because these pieces actually could have been in racialization or they could have been in religion. These artists, Walter Williams and James Wells, they wanted to represent how Black people were taken out of religious art. When we think about religious art, typically we think about white Jesus, light blonde hair, blue eyes, light Mother Mary, light hair, blue eyes. We don't typically think about people of color when we think about religious artworks. And so This particular piece called The Black Madonna is showcasing the Mother Virgin Mary with baby Jesus. And then we see the piece right here by James Wells. It's called Bathsheba. He's putting Bathsheba, the character from the Bible, showing that she actually was a person of color and that she was someone who was an important figure in religious art. And so it's really important for us to have an understanding that, yes, Black people were racialized, were taken out of religious art, but thanks to artists like these two, they were placed back in where they belong. This beautiful piece by Whitfield Lovell shows great detail, lots of color, and it says, I wanted to be a gardener, but they taught me to lay bricks. And so this particular piece of artwork is a wonderful representation of the fact that African-American people were racialized when it came to economic development. Many times we know from history that Black people were restricted in different types of jobs that they could do. And so this particular piece is a representation of the fact that for many, many years, Black people were told what they could do, what kinds of jobs they could do, how much money they could make. Today, we have a little bit more agency in that. Not much, but a little bit more. But back then, a lot of our ancestors, they didn't have agency. They were told what they could do, what kinds of jobs they were eligible for. And so that's what this piece is a representation of, the racialization of economic development for Black people. In the exhibition theme, Racialization, you'll see beautiful works by Beverly Buckhannon. She's one of my favorite artists in the show. I have several of her pieces in this show. And these 3 pieces are done by Beverly Buckhannon. She was an artist who was oftentimes inspired by the racialization of redlining. As we all know, redlining is a form of discrimination that tells Black people, or that told Black people where they could live. A lot of the inner city ghettos that we know of today happened because of redlining. Redlining was a lot of red tape, was a lot of bureaucracy that kept people, Black people, from living in different neighborhoods that were the more desirable neighborhoods. And so oftentimes Black people were forced to live in slum neighborhoods, forced to live in places that were undesirable. And so Beverly Buckhannon, a lot of the work that she does is a representation of that. And so she does a lot of work with shacks, a lot of work with looking at disenfranchised locations that Black people live in. This particular piece is called Leon. When I got a chance to curate the exhibition, Wes and Missy Cochran, they lived on a farm, and actually this cabin is on their farm. Leon was one of the people that actually lived on the farm before Wes and Missy Cochran bought the farm. This house is an old cabin style house wrapped in tar paper. As you can see, it's held up on little cobblestones. And Beverly Buckhannon wanted to really take a photo to grab the essence of Leon and this particular place that he lived in. This place, this one is called Clear Up This Yard. It's a representation of some of the homes that African-American people were subjected to living in because of the fact that they weren't able to live in better homes and better neighborhoods. This particular piece is one of my absolute favorites. It's called Pink Windows Are Lucky. And the reason why this piece is so special to me is because Beverly Buckhannon wanted to give the impression and retell the story of the fact that African-American people, even though they were racialized, even though they were forced to live in disenfranchised homes, there's still happiness in these homes. There's still joy in these homes, which, as we know, is a form of resistance. If Black people can live in joy, they are resisting. And so Beverly Buckhannon's work oftentimes talks about the fact that, yes, we were disenfranchised, but yes, we are still living in happiness. During the curation process, when I was in conversation with the collectors, Wes and Missy Cochran, they allowed me to come to their home to see some of the other artworks that I was interested in having for the show. And so as soon as I walked in their house, I saw this piece. It was just sitting on their end table. And I looked over at Wes. I said, can I have this one? Can I use this one for the show? And Wes originally told me no. He said, no, this is the only one we have. It's very fragile. We usually don't lend this one out. But I told him, I said, look, if you let me have this piece, I promise we'll take very good care of it. This piece is very important, and I want other people to be able to see and enjoy this piece. And so he agreed. And as you can see, it's wrapped in a beautiful case. But this piece is also by artist Beverly Buchanan. She was inspired by Leon's cabin. When she came to stay on Wes and Missy Cochran's farm, she got a chance to see Leon's cabin. She took a photo of Leon's cabin, but she also then created this beautiful sculpture that she calls the Shack. The ceramic plate by Camille Billups is called Strange Fruit. The title of the piece was inspired by Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. Billie Holiday, many of you all may know, was very famous for singing that particular song that became the anthem of the civil rights movement and brought awareness to the fact that African-American people were being lynched. So this particular piece of artwork, as you can see, is a ceramic plate. And when you look closely at it, you can see a tree. And it looks like there are ropes hanging from the tree and bodies also swinging from the tree. So the concept of strange fruit is just a representation to bring awareness to the fact that African-American people were lynched for many years after the abolishment of slavery. Thank you all for joining me for the virtual tour of RETOLD, African American Art and Folklore. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned some things. The purpose of this show for me was to be able to bring some light to the stories behind African American culture, this aspect of remembering who our ancestors were, this aspect of telling the story about how we resist as Black people against certain discriminations and other things that we deal with, how we are still being racialized today in our society, and then how religion is a very much so a big part of African American culture. This exhibition was a way for me to be able to help bring some humanity, to help bring some understanding to the African American culture. And I'm hoping that after you've seen this show, that you have a greater love for and admiration and respect for African American culture and folklore.